3, 2. Welcome back, spooky people. Welcome back, spooky people, to That Spooky Life Podcast. I'm your host, Miranda, and I'm happy that you are here. As I mentioned last week, which it's not required that you necessarily go listen to last week to listen to this one, but I'm just saying if you haven't, you totally should. This episode is going to be another one that's not in the normal format. I've done this once before so far, but in this topic, it's really important that I start with the listener-submitted story today and follow up with my own, mostly because that's the chronological order and progression, for the most part, that this story follows. So today's story was submitted by one of my very best friends, Danielle. And I have been saving my experience with her house until she finally got this written up to send. So, thank you, Danielle. I appreciate you and your time. And I also appreciate a lot of the details that I knew most of, but not all of. And I hope you guys are ready for this one. Also, obviously I'm recording. So the dog has determined that this is the best time to play with her loudest and squeakiest of toys. I'm going to try and make sure that that doesn't make it into the podcast, but if it does, well, that's how the Freya do. Isis is suspiciously absent for the moment, which means she may be outside and waiting to come back into the room, but she's the one that normally shows up when I start recording. However, today, apparently the Catahoula German Shepherd makes Freya, of the freckled face and thunderboots, is like, oh, okay, Mom's recording. Time to make the loudest noise possible. So, a little bit of backstory. Danielle has lived in this house for more than a decade, and this has been ongoing since before her youngest child was born. Her experience is as follows. Danielle writes, So this is a story that spans the frame of numerous years. To set it up, first you have to know how my house is set up. It's rather large, with an above-the-garage mother-in-law suite, which various family members have lived in over the years, but currently my mother-in-law occupies it. Between the garage and the main house, on the ground floor, is a mudroom that leads into what is now the master bedroom, the laundry room, a foyer, and then the rest of the house with the kids' bedrooms, living room, and kitchen area, and a bathroom directly off the kitchen. Ever since moving into that house, the bedroom just off the kitchen hasn't felt right. But that room, the bathroom, and a part of the kitchen are the only parts of the house on the original foundation. In 1994, the house was redone, including most of the foundation. The only remaining parts of the original is under that bedroom. It's also the tallest part of the house, and while there isn't a second story, that part of the house has the most attic space to create one if I so chose. My brother stayed in that room for a while. And I mostly just rationalized the weird away as leftover energetic impressions from him. But then I made it the nursery for my youngest child. I don't remember anything specific for a while, but before she was born, I do know it bothered me so much in there, I did a house blessing and blessed the shit out of that room. It was better, but only for a while. Instances of this experience include footsteps being heard upstairs, and for a while you don't think anything of it until you realize that there is no upstairs. In the attic, there's more than enough room to stand up and walk, but in the areas that it is not But in the areas that it's tall enough to do so, there is nowhere to walk. The only boards down where somebody could walk around are on the other side of the house, and that's not where you would hear the footsteps. After my youngest was born, we started noticing strange things like toys going off when they were either turned off or no one else was in the room. Not even the baby. Or she would be asleep and toys would go off. They would light up, make noises, and each instance that this was noticed, there was never anybody actually in the room. One of my oldest children had an experience with a little iron that would turn on and make little bubbling sounds as if you were steaming and had a light on the front of it. And one day when he was in the house, this was lighting up and making sounds all on its own, not being played with, not in a room with anybody. So, logically, he just took out the batteries because it was freaking him out. At which point, it continued to light up and make sound. And he dropped it, said, "Fuck that," and never went back in that room. I continued to rationalize this away, thinking, well, maybe there's a backup battery for just the little light or something like that, and still didn't think much of it. There was another toy that my youngest had a little later on that was a tiny little kitchen setup, where if you placed the frying pan onto the top of the stove and hit a button, it would make the sounds like the frying pan was actually frying something. Well, speaking from personal experience, the button to make this sound was not an easy one to press. It was difficult even for an adult. Most times, my child didn't make it go off unless they really put their back into it. And it was not an easy button to make. It was not easy to make that sound go off. And yet, if there was no one in the room, and I was the only one in the house, or other people were there but not in that room, that sound, the frying pan sound, would continually come from the bedroom. Again, I rationalized it off as perhaps a short or something of the like. Then, my youngest started being afraid of the dark. Of course, when they're little, you have a nightlight in there so that you could check on them without turning on the overhead light and risk waking them up. But it got to a point that she refused to sleep without a nightlight. In fact, in addition to her regular nightlight, there was a Halloween decoration that lit up brighter of a little pumpkin that she refused to sleep without once she gained it. Additionally, she started to display Additionally, she started to display a fear of faces, like the knots in a natural wood door, things like that. One night, I had tucked her in and went to do something in the kitchen and came back to check on her when she was asleep and found that all of her stuffed animals she had gathered around her, she had turned them all away so that none of their faces were looking at her. I didn't think anything of it at the time as necessarily a related experience, just a strange thing that she'd picked up. But then, I saw him for the first time. I was alone in the house and in the kitchen, and I don't know what it is exactly that drew my eyes to the open door of my youngest darkened room. But I saw a little blonde head and a young face duck around the corner just out of sight. I was freaked out. Needless to say, I was freaked out. Then, after that, I would start seeing him elsewhere. Running down the hall, just in the corner of my eye, being on the other side of my bed in the dark. One of my older sons saw him apparently at one point in the bathroom that's right next to my youngest's bedroom and off the kitchen. My husband has also seen him a few times, though more glimpses, and definitely heard the footsteps. Everybody in the house has heard the footsteps at some point. Eventually, I start to realize that this is actually an intelligent haunting in my house. I can't rationalize it anymore, and it always happens when I'm alone in the house, which triggers my anxiety and just leaves me in a not great place. So I have a little come to Jesus meeting with him. Come to Jesus meeting, I love that. So I realize that while thinking about this after a time of being particularly surprised, that technically, if I really wanted to, I could make him leave. But where would he go? He's not really doing anything other than spooking people. And I finally say out loud, you can't do this. You can't be here. You are not allowed to creep me out when I'm alone. It causes me anxiety, and that's just rude. So, I don't mind if you stay here, but I don't want to see you, and I certainly don't want to see you when I'm alone. Somewhere in this time, my mother-in-law moves into the mother-in-law suite upstairs. We hadn't really talked to anybody about this. In fact, we hadn't even talked to each other about this. We just all had our individual experiences, and I hadn't yet put together that my youngest was afraid of the dark and faces because there was a little boy scaring her in her room. So my mother-in-law moves in, and she's doing laundry. She comes downstairs to do laundry one day and hears footsteps and thinks, oh, okay, somebody's upstairs. Wait, there's not an upstairs. Additionally, a scenario that only she has experienced, she would hear old-timey music from upstairs. Things like from the 1940s, her childhood, that at first don't seem odd until you realize that A, again, there's no upstairs, and B, who would be playing 1940s music? So, at this point, my mother-in-law's husband has passed on, and she believes that he had come back to visit her a few times just to check in and make sure that she was okay. The supernatural in this area does not particularly bother her, and at the point that he had come to visit her in her mother-in-law suite in my house, she had sort of just accepted ghosts as a thing. And then she sees this little boy who will run up and down her hallway between her laundry room and her bathroom. And she thinks that's odd, because it's certainly not her husband. So one night, and I don't remember how it came to the topic, we're all sitting around having dinner, and Sue says, and my mother-in-law says something to the effect of, the little boy that runs around the house, or there's something going on in your house, and I say, oh yeah, the little boy. And then we all sitting there realize that we've each had all of these experiences over the years that none of us had ever shared until this moment, and it clicks with me that is why my youngest is afraid of the dark and faces, because our house is haunted. At which point, I explain to my mother-in-law that I said, you can stay here, but I don't want to see you, and especially not when I'm alone. You know, I guess he can go upstairs and live with you, in sort of a joking manner. To which she responds, I'd be fine with that. So I reaffirm that, hey, you can stay here, I don't want to see you, especially when I'm not alone, or I will make you leave, but you can stay upstairs with my mother-in-law. And after that, that's mostly where he's been seen. It's worked for the better part of 3 years, and while occasionally I'll glimpse him on holidays, and we will hear or see him upstairs in the mother-in-law suite, it seems to have worked for the most part. Until... And this is the end of the listener story for the day. Next, the until is where my story begins. 3, 2. So my story for the day has one part in the past, but technically picks up from where the until leaves off of Danielle's story. I've been part and parcel to this ongoing for years now. There was a time that I came to visit when her oldest kid was like 2. No, I think we determined he was more like 4. And he was having nightmares from his uncle showing him the Silent Hill video game. Yeah, I know, smooth move, but he was just, he was having nightmares. He didn't want to sleep in his own room, etc. So he was sleeping in a toddler bed at the foot of Danielle's bed. Anyway, the only experience I had before the big story I'm going to share is that spending the night, I slept in Danielle's bed with her and the 2-year-old who inevitably crawled up into the bed between us, obviously. And I woke up I didn't have any experiences that night. I didn't know anything about it. This was not at a time that I was particularly sharing paranormal experiences. This was not at a time that she had started talking about it. So none the wiser, had no idea, whatever. And I woke up to hearing her in the kitchen cooking breakfast, and it smelled delicious. I smelled the bacon. And the toddler was running in front of the bedroom doorway, like just running up and down. I was like, okay, so they're both up. I know for a fact that she will wake me up when breakfast is ready. I'm going to catch, even if it's just another 10, 15 minutes of sleep, because I am on vacation. I rolled over to go back to sleep and found the toddler still sleeping next to me. I tucked him under my arm for a cuddle and started to go back to sleep when I realized that if the baby was asleep next to me, who the hell had I seen run across the doorway? Because it was a little blonde boy, just like the one that was sleeping next to me, and I was confused. But I, again, was not sharing paranormal experiences that time. It was just not something I did. And I was still tired, so I was out too fast to think on it much, and by the time I'd woken up again, I'd honestly forgotten. And I forgot about that for a couple of years until, honestly, we started talking about her experiences, and I was like, oh, right. Completely just came back to me like a slap in the face. It was crazy. Fast forward 13 years, Danielle and her family's experiences and the come to Jesus meetings that involve telling him to not be seen when she's alone and staying upstairs for the most part. So, I come up for another visit. Literally earlier this year. And it's a whole long weekend with a convention that I'm going to during the day, in which time it was a sarcastic twist of the arm to ask Danielle and her kids to watch my Munchkin. We get settled in, and I go back to Grand Rapids for the first evening's events to get back to Danielle's house probably around like 1:30 in the morning. It was real late. It was after midnight, and everybody was asleep, as expected. I came in quietly, changed clothes, and slipped into the guest bed beside my sleeping little one for some long-awaited shut-eye. I should mention that, quote, the guest bed was actually the youngest one's room. This was the youngest one's bed, and she was sleeping on the couch, having given up her room for me and my little one. You see where this is going. So, unfortunately, I start to have that prickly feeling in my lower back that tells me that something is watching me, and I hate that feeling. I take a few slow, deep breaths to clear my mind and focus. I was like, I just drove like 13 hours and then went and did a convention for the day. I'm exhausted. God knows my anxiety is probably just ready to dive off the deep end. Let's see what's going on. So I focus, and I get the mental impression of a little boy standing in the doorway. At the same time, my baby stirs, twitching in a nightmare, and starts boo-hooing in her sleep. She's not yet 2 at this time, and had not at that point had but like maybe 1 or 2 nightmares or night terrors. Like it wasn't, there's an age where they come to it and they start having nightmares and night terrors pretty consistently for a little while. She was not there yet. This was new. This was not normal. But as I watched, I watch the decay of the pieces, I watch the decline of peace that my little one experiences in sleep into just boo-hooing and sort of wakes herself up. So Honestly, for those tense moments, I completely forgot about the little boy standing in the doorway. Again, ghosts are kind of part and parcel for me, and it's not odd for me to see these things. And I wasn't remembering my experience from years ago at that point either. I was too tired for that shit. But it wasn't odd that I'm like sensing something or that something has noticed me. And sorry, my kid's having a moment. You're not important to me at the moment. So I observe, make sure that she's okay. And when she startles awake and bursts into tears, I cuddle and comfort her until she goes back to sleep. In this time, Danielle, being a mom and pretty sure I was home but not sure enough to risk it, comes in to check on her. We have the whispered mom convo of, yeah, it's a nightmare, everything's fine, I think, and Danielle pulls the door to for the most part. At this point, two things happen in short order, one part of which I wouldn't find out until the morning. Closing the door, Danielle pads back into the kitchen and stops as she sees the familiar ghost of the little boy in there. Unless she knew their deal, he was not to come down and scare her when she was alone. But before she can get her mom voice on to tell him to go back, he projects a creepy Pennywise-style kid clown face and just rushes at her. Well, it worked. It spooked her, because nothing like that had ever happened before, and she completely darted back to her bedroom to the safety of her sleeping husband. So, shortly after this, if we're on the right timing, as I believe we were, I was nearly asleep, having settled the baby, and noticed the door start to swing open slowly, and the little boy is back. It was the same little boy I'd seen years ago. I was still not at all remembering this at the time, but he was standing in the middle of the doorway, glowering at me. And it was because he knew I could see him. And he wanted me to pay attention to him. And he wanted me to get up and talk to him. And he wanted, and he wanted, and he wanted. He was trying to demand my attention like any young kid is. Now, to be clear, having seen this kid separately from Danielle, but also now discussed it, we see about the same thing. He looks to be no more than 6 years old, probably more like 5. He's usually wearing some sort of little polo shirt and or shorts. Sometimes she sees him in like suspenders and like a nicer pants, but it's still like a little polo shirt. To me, he has like a little bowl cut and he's got like dirty blonde hair. It's completely straight. So he's trying to get my attention and I'm like, listen, I know, this is not my first ghosty rodeo. You know I can see you. I know I can see you. You know I can see you. And you want to talk to me, you want to play, you want to do something. But I'm exhausted. I think you might be scaring my kid because she had started to stir again. I am not saying any of this out loud. This is all things that I am projecting thought at him kind of thing. I need to go to sleep. I will be happy to talk to you in the morning. Well, as many of you may know, if you have ever dealt with a 5 or 6 year old child, they want what they want when they want it. That was not good enough. So, not having any idea that Danielle had just had the experience with the clown face, I'm lying there and I start seeing a clown face in my mind. I'm like, why am I seeing a clown face? Like, there's nothing in this room that has anything to do with clowns at all. So it's not like, I glimpsed something and my subconscious is producing it for me. But the more I see the clown face, the less scary it looks. And the more it kind of honestly looks drawn with crayons and like a projection. Now, when I get impressions like this, sometimes the imagery will be telegraphing information to me rather than that actually being what I was seeing. So like, then there was a second one. There was like a scary goblin face because I actually whispered at that point, I'm not afraid of clowns. That's ridiculous. because I don't have that fear. And so a scary green goblin face shows up, but this one is even more sort of like scribbled in crayon in my mind's eye. And I don't think he was projecting the scribbled in crayon. I think that was my mind's filter of telling me that he was trying to scare me because I wasn't paying attention to him. And he used a clown first and then a scary goblin face. And I'm like, look, you need to go away now. And I pushed him out of the house. That being said, I did not know at the time, even to this year, that Danielle had made a deal with him that he was not allowed to be seen when she was alone and that he was mostly supposed to stay upstairs in the mother-in-law suite. I didn't know that, but I was tired, and at this point I was irritated. So I literally pushed him out of the house. I didn't make him go away. I didn't make him go away permanently or anything like that. I was just like, you gotta go. Bye. And after that, it was peaceful. The energy in the room changed, and I was able to go to sleep. Slept all through the night. So, in the morning, Danielle and I are the only ones up, other than the toddler. And she's like, so a weird thing happened last night. And I was like, yeah, so a weird thing happened last night to me too. We swap stories, have an oh my god moment, and I start getting filled in on the details of the story that I didn't know to that point. There were a few in the story that were just like little experiences, like the older kids with the iron and things like that. But for the most part, what I shared with you was shared with me. And I realized that either my presence was either so interesting he broke what he was supposed to be doing, or I accidentally like magnetized him there, because I certainly wasn't looking for his ass, I'll tell you that. I think because he is a mischievous little ankle biter, as I will call it. He likes to spook her on holidays occasionally, and it's very much in the haha spirit of a kid being caught red-handed, like in the oops and then gone, but like he was still there. So, like, he knew what he was doing. He's very mischievous. So I don't think it was necessarily that I was magnetized there. I think that he was willing to get in trouble to see what the heck was going on. But I also don't understand why he did what he did to Danielle, because she hadn't seen him in like 3 years, not like that at least. And the fact that he tried to scare her and rushed at her, that was not cool. I haven't been back to actually sit down and figure out why. So once we cover all of our bases, and I remember the story from years ago about having seen him, I draw him. And I was like, I'm going to draw what I saw, and then I will compare it. You can compare it to what you usually see. Well, I drew it, and I colored it, and gave it... I had very limited resources. If I could find the picture, again, I will put it on Instagram for you guys. So, Danielle sees this and like puts her hand over her mouth. She's like, oh my god, that's exactly it. That is exactly it. We need to go show my mother-in-law. So we go upstairs to over the garage and show her the picture, and she's like, yep, that's him. And so we share, I share my experience with her. She tells me about seeing him in her hallway and everything. And the whole time he's up there and he's listening and he's watching us, and he's just like shuffling up and down her hallway, pouting. Because we're not talking to him. We're talking about him, but we're not talking to him. So while I was up there, I had a little come to Jesus of my own with him. And I explained to him that he is not to touch, look at, show himself, or do anything related to my baby, or I will very much make him leave in a way he will not enjoy and will be very permanent. He is allowed to stay here. He has been approved by the people who live here to be in his areas, and that is completely fine and not my call because I don't live here. However, that if he messed with my baby at all, I was going to take precedence and he was going away. So he pouted, but like he didn't argue or anything. And I told him to keep his ass upstairs. Well, for the most part, he did. The mud room mentioned in the first part of this story is where we go to smoke. because it's away from the elements, and in Michigan that's super important. And this has happened a couple of times now. But Danielle and I are sitting out there smoking, talking about something completely unrelated. I think we were talking about her job or something like that. And she just keeps glancing behind me, and I'm like, what is he? Oh. And I look, and he's basically sitting on the steps up to the mother-in-law suite, pouting. Like, I see you. I know y'all'd see me if you bothered to look. You could be talking to me. You could be talking with me, but you're not. And at some point, I completely intend to. I did at one point over the weekend ask him how he died, and he showed me something completely terrible that I don't believe. He tried to basically convince me that he was murdered, and the last thing that he saw was an elderly man who was above him. But Danielle's impressions are an accident of some sort, and we are still trying to get to the bottom of it. There is a history museum in the area that is volunteer and therefore not open at like regular hours, sometimes open around the holidays, etc., that we are going to try and find some old newspapers and things like that. We're going to try and get to the bottom of this little boy, because this has been one heck of a saga that is not even remotely done yet. So if at some point in the future we are able to find more information, because he's still around, he still stands, on the stairs and pouts, and will occasionally risk it and show himself around the holidays, things like that. Her mother-in-law still sees him running up and down the hallways occasionally. So if at some point in the future we are able to find out the origin, the history of this young man, I will very excitedly immediately record a podcast and share that with you guys. But until then, that is my spooky story for this week, and how it has all been sort of intertwined with the listener story for this week. So in closing, my witchy wisdom for this week, it's not a tarot card or anything, it sort of piggybacks off my little pro tip from last week. I think this story is a very good example of hauntings are scary, and they can have an impact, like little kids being afraid of the dark, or faces in the dark, or things like that, and being a grown-ass woman and tearing through the house away from something that spooked you. Like, it's not to say that they are not still scary, but sometimes hauntings aren't violent, and we tend to react poorly to things that we're scared of. If you think you're being haunted, just try stating boundaries. Like, start off there. Sometimes that's all it takes. And, if it doesn't, obviously, move on to step 2. The smudging and the house blessings, and finding somebody who may be a little more experienced to make it more permanent than what you just saying something out loud. But you never know. It could just be you're not welcome in my bedroom while I'm sleeping. Like, I don't care if you're here, but you're not allowed to scare me in my bedroom while I'm sleeping. I don't want to see you. Because a lot of times, if they're not a horrible, violent haunting like all of the ones that we see on TV or anything Zach Baggins has ever run into, that may be all it takes for you to live like a reasonable, non-frustrating, non-anxiety and fear-filled life while a spirit just coexists beside you. Do history research. See if there's anything in the area that might have caused something. If you find out that there was a horrible murder and murderer, like serial killer, that lived in your house, first of all, I would recommend looking at moving. I wouldn't live there. Second of all, yeah, obviously, do some more stuff. And make sure that your experiences, like, you take them for what they are. Again, make sure you take them for what they are. In this story that has spanned more than a decade, there's never been any... Hey. But when you have an experience, make sure that you take it for what it actually is. There's nothing in either of these stories. No one was hurt. Nothing had been thrown or broken. Just kids' toys coming on and seeing things out of the corner of your eye. Even when he seemed really mad, what he was doing was just trying to scare us. I'm not saying that's every haunting, but I am saying that for your sanity, make sure that if something scares you, don't necessarily think that it's the devil come into the house to take your soul. It may just be a little 5-year-old boy who died in a horrible accident who isn't used to being seen or interacted with, and therefore, if you can see and interact with him, maybe your house is where he likes to be because he can actually be spoken to. But at the same time, if you have yourself a demon, get yourself a priest or a priestess and get that demon out, or get out of the house. I'm just saying. The hashtag witchy wisdom pro tip is be observant and make sure that you have the tools and the reaction for the level of what you're actually experiencing and not knee-jerking out of fear. Because there's a mystery to be solved here. And, you know, Danielle very well could have salted the earth and done like a full house blessing and made sure that he stayed out forever, told him to go away. I could have done the same thing in knee-jerk reaction out of fear. But as it is, we now have a mystery to solve and a cool story to tell. So that's kind of a... I didn't plan this out well. Sorry that it's a little bit rambly, but those are my thoughts on the subject. If you have a listener story you would like to share, I would love that. The longer, the better. I would very much like to thank everybody who has submitted. I have loved all of your stories, and I'm really looking forward to getting to a couple that I have right now. But I always need more. Special shout out to Danielle. Thank you for taking the time to help me cobble together what it is that we have experienced over the years. And if you have a story you would like me to share, please send it to ThatSpookyLifePodcast at gmail.com. Or I'm also happy to talk to you on social media, Instagram at ThatSpookyLifePodcast. Additionally, I will try and make sure to post pictures. If I can find the drawing of the little boy that I did, I even drew the little faces that he was trying to project and like how it looked to me. So I will try and post those there. But if you would like to get with me and talk about spooky stories, send me a message there. And I guarantee you, if you get there to share a spooky story with me, I am going to ask you if I can use it on the podcast. Because I never have enough and I love reading them all. So I hope that the weekend ahead of you, followed by the week until we speak again, is wonderful, and that you stay warm, and that you and all of yours are happy and healthy in these coming winter days. But until next week, I wish you well, but until next week, keep living that spooky life, and I will see you then. Bye.